So here we are in chapter 3 then, and this chapter is going to be all about getting our character ready to animate with moving forward. So we're going to be rigging him. And before we can move on though, there are a couple of housekeeping things that I should have done in the last step, but I forgot to, so we'll get those sorted now. The first of these is the fact that I didn't put a material on these two parts of his neck. So I'm just going to select both of those. We'll just go into the Hypershade quickly, find my chrome material and assign material to selection. Like that. And then that will have this metallic material on. Next we want to just move our character up so that he's standing on the grid. And to do that I'm just going to select everything. But I'm just going to deselect his foot and reselect the foot, and that will just put this controller down at the bottom. And then we're going to move into one of these views. And again, a bit of housekeeping. Let's just turn off the image planes. Like that. And we'll need to turn on the grid for a minute, just so that I can line this up. So it's about getting his feet onto this thicker black line here. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be close. That'll do there. So then we can just turn these grids back off because they just look ugly on video. And one final thing I want to do, and this is just a prep stage for later, that's to get all these parts of his body, all the geometry, and we're going to put this into its own layer, and that will mean that we can make that layer reference later so that we don't accidentally select it. But for now we're just going to put it into the layer. So with everything selected, we'll click on layers, and then we're going to go to create layer from selected, and that'll put this. So if I just toggle the V, that everything that I had selected is in that layer. We will rename the layer to Geo, which is short for geometry, and save it. Okay, now we're ready to start rigging. So, first of all, I can deselect everything, and I need to change my menu set from modeling to rigging. And we get some new options up here. And the one that we want to open first of all, if we go to skeleton, it is the HumanIK option. We click on that and it opens it up, and then we get some tools here that we can use. What we need to do is just click on the first button, which will create a skeleton for us. There it is, and you can see that because of the way that we modelled our character, the scale isn't too far off. But you can see that it's not perfect because he's got arms coming out of his head, which is not how most people work. So we need to sort that scale out, and we also want to make it so that we can just see the rest of the skeleton. And in the viewport there is an option for that. This little chap here, which is called X-ray joints, or you can also get it from, I think it's in show, no, in lighting, no, in shading, X-ray joints. But I'm just going to click it here, and then it will always show the joints on top. And so before we just start to get this scale correct, let's name this character so that we know what we're working with. So on this little drop down here, you can click on rename character and give it a name. I'm going to call it Rob for Rob the Robot. I know that's a little bit cliche, but I'm not feeling uber creative today. There we go. Right, now we need to just scale him down. Now there are different ways of doing this. You can just change the character scale in here. So if we go to something like 0.8, and that will scale it down. But then you see that sets it back to 1, and it's a bit finicky. So I'm just going to undo that. And the way that I like to do it is there's this little controller here. If you select on that, so it's just a little cross between the legs. And you can use that to make sure that the scale tool is available to you. And for now, what I'm going to do is just switch to the front view, because what I'm most interested in is getting this hips controller in the center of the hips, about there. So whether or not the arms line up or the head's not important for now. We're just getting the hips in place, and everything else will flow out from there. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now what we'll do, we'll leave the legs for now. We're going to work our way up the spine. But you can see there's only one point at which the spine can bend because of the way we've constructed the robot, which means there are too many spine joints. So what we can do is here, in our settings, we can just take the spine joints down to 1. And you'll see that will alter the way that our rig looks a little bit, but it also means it's a little bit more accurate as well. So now we can just move up to the next joint, which will be called something like spine or spine 1. I forget what it is. The name is not important for now. We're going to move that up to here, which is the point at which you can see it will look like the little robot can articulate. So that's where we're going to place that. Next we're going to work on the arm. And you can see that I'm working on this arm specifically. I'm never going to do anything on this side of the character. We just work on this side and then we can mirror it. So this little area here is essentially the clavicle. We're going to put that up to about there. And then this one here is going to be where the shoulder rotates from. And I'm just going to place that about there. Yeah, which makes sense. It's pretty much the center of this little shoulder joint we created earlier. Then we need to put the elbow in place. So that's going to be pretty much in the center of that joint we created. And then finally we need to move to this joint, this joint here. And this is going to be where the hand pretty much connects. So you can see this is the bit where it needs to bend from. In fact, I'm probably going to put it about there so that the range of movement's not too high. And you can see that I was moving this across and I've now just moved that arm piece down. I need to check that that hasn't broken the definition. So what I'll do is just move over to this tab here. Everything here is green. It says characterization is valid. As long as everything's green, any changes that you make are okay. If they ever go orange, then you've done something wrong, you need to redo it. And you'll have noticed that so far, the way that I've moved all of these joints around is that I've moved them. I've used the move tool. If, however, I use the rotate tool, so I've moved that one down, but if I'd done it by rotating, you see that these have now gone orange, which means bad. Bad, bad. So undo that, make sure that all stays green. Now I'll just be flicking back and forth between these two tabs to make sure I'm not doing anything silly. But that there is going to do it for this part of the arm. What I need to do now is just check how it looks in the top. And we can see the answer to that is not great. So we're going to select these again. And I'm probably just going to press 5 on this and turn on X-ray joints just to make it a bit easier for me to work with. So we'll bring the arm forward at the shoulder. And then everything else should line up because it's that hierarchical structure, which means that when you do something at the top of the chain, everything below that follows it. You can see that the wrist, I'm just about happy with. I'll leave that there. Next, we need to do the fingers. And again, we might need to make a change to the rig because I think we've got too many joints in the fingers for the amount of joints we've got in the hand that we modelled. So I'm going to take the number of bones down to 2. And you'll see that reflected in the hand. And I'm also going to just keep the thumb and the middle finger. You can see that there aren't individual fingers in this. It's just like a mitten. So we only need one finger to control it. So we'll take off the index, the ring, and the pinky. And that is all the hand we need. And then it's just about putting things in place. So it's where bends should happen, really. So I'm going to straighten this up. And then move that to where the bend should be. Same with this one. And then this one here is just going to go right out to the end of the finger. Or close enough. I'm overlapping it a bit because there's a bit of a slant to it. And then we're going to do something similar with the thumb. So that's going to bend about there. This one here is going to go about here. And this one's going to go out to the end of the finger. Or thumb. And then what we need to do is for the thumb, especially, I like to go into the 3D view to check this. Because you can see the thumb actually has a bit of the height. So the finger stays flat, but the thumb drops down a little bit. And a lot of people will model their characters in a way that makes sense. I tend not to. So we'll get that part of the thumb. We'll just bring it up to about the middle. Get the next joint, move that up a bit. And then the end of the finger should be fine. Okay, I think I'm happy with the arm. Next I'll do the leg. So I'm going to move into the front view for this. You'll see I'll be changing my views fairly regularly for this to choose the one that makes the most sense. And then we're going to put this here. And it's not ever so important that this is in the center of this circle bit, or the sphere. This is actually more of an optical illusion. It makes more sense to have it where we want the leg to swing from. And I'm going to put it about there. Try and get it as central as possible. That looks good. And then we're going to get the knee, which is currently too low down. So we're going to drop that in place there. And then I'm probably going to change to the side view now to check where the foot should be. So yeah, that for the knee is fine. The ankle joint then is going to come down. And again, this needs to be where you want it to articulate. So for me, I think I want it to articulate about there. And then this part, I always used to think that it went right to the front of the foot, but it doesn't. It goes to the ball of the foot, which is about there in this case. Perfect. And so there's only one more thing that we need to look at, and that's the head and the neck as well, I suppose. So this is a neck joint. We're going to move that up, and I think it's about there, but we need to check the side view for this as well. And yeah, that's pretty spot on. So remember that the way that the neck bends is just an illusion, really. Nothing actually bends. And then this bit here is the head. Oh. And this usually goes to the top of the head, so I'm going to go fairly central and up towards the top. Okay, so that is now all the bones in place. What we need to do now is have them mirror over. So this side's good, this side not so good. So what we'll do is just click on this little icon here, and as long as we have this Rob character selected, it shouldn't matter what selection we have here. Some people think you need to select the bones that you want to mirror, but you can see I've got this top of his head selected here. If I just click on this icon, boop, there we go, he's now all mirrored. And that's all we need to do in this step, really. We've got the skeleton created, we've created a character definition, we've called him Rob, we've put all the joints in the right place, and we've mirrored them over. So in the next step, we're going to be creating a control rig for the skeleton, and also connecting the geometry to the skeleton so that when we move the skeleton, that will drive the movement of the character. So I will see you in the next step. Now that we've created and got the skeleton that we want, our final step on the rigging chapter is going to be to get this control rig in place and to make sure that the geometry follows the skeleton. Right, so what we have so far is a skeleton, and if we select any of these joints, we can use the rotate controller, and that will move it. And you could animate this way if you wanted to, but Maya is much more powerful than that, and it has some really cool tools that you can use. The way that we want to access this first of all is if we just go to Definition, and then we've got some additional controls across the top, and there's this one here, which is Create Control Rig. If we click on that, you'll see that the skeleton starts to look a little bit different, and we've got lots of these extra controls here. And this is what we want. So now, instead of having to rotate, I can grab this circle here, put my move tool on, and then just move that hand around. You can see at the moment we haven't attached the geometry to it, but the skeleton is now moving in what's called inverse kinematics, which means that it's doing the maths. If I move the hand, it'll calculate what needs to happen with all the other joints to get that hand over there. The same applies with the hips, like that, and also with things like the shoulders. So that's brilliant. We've also got the fact that the skeleton's still there. And you'll see that with my move tool, this really doesn't want to move. But with my rotate tool, it does. And that's because it gives us the ability to animate with both forward kinematics, which is when you rotate each bone individually, and inverse kinematics, where you select a controller and you can just kind of move it around. So that's brilliant, isn't it? I'm a big, big fan of that. So now that we've got that, there are a few things about it we can change. So at the moment, we've got this selected, which is full body. And you see that if I move this, the whole thing goes. We can change this here, and instead of full body, it'll just move the arm, which can be better for making sure that you don't completely lose control. And then there is this one, which is just for the selection, but in this case you can't do anything with it. That would only work on forward kinematics, really. And you can also change, so I'm just going to put that back. You can also change the look of these controls. So if we go into this little blue drop-down menu here, and to edit control rig, there's a rig look. And at the moment we're on wire. But if you want box instead, so that you want this to be a little bit easier to see, you can change that. And there is also the option to have stick, which looks like that. And this is down to personal preference. My preference is the wire, because that's the one I'm used to. But you can choose whichever one you're most comfortable with. They just look different, and they all work the same. Okay then, now that we have set up this control rig for our skeleton, we need to make it so the geometry is going to follow that skeleton. So here's what we'll do for that. We need to just turn off the forward kinematics and the inverse kinematics. So this is the two types of control that Maya just created for us. And we're going to click on this icon here, which turns back on the original skeleton. And this is what we're going to make sure all the geometry follows. And I'll try and demonstrate this as clearly as I can. So what we need to do first of all is select a piece of geometry. and we're going to start with the hips, and then we need to select the piece of the skeleton that we want that geometry to follow when it moves. And I'm just going to turn off the move tool for this. So I've got that, and I want this to follow this joint here. So I'm going to shift select the hips. And because this is in a hierarchy, you'll see it selects the whole rig, but that's not a problem. And then what we need to do is parent the geometry to the rig. So selecting in that order was important. Geometry, then joint, and then you can go to edit and parent. Or I'll show you on the next joint. So this one here, I'm also going to parent to the same joint. So shift select. And this time I'm just going to press P on my keyboard. And now if I was to move this skeleton, you would see that, although this whole skeleton doesn't go with it, but you would see that when I move that joint, that goes with it, which is good. Next up, we're going to select the torso, and that's going to follow this joint. So then we'll press P. Lovely. The next piece of geometry that I'm interested in is this one here, and I'm going to have this follow the clavicle. Oh, no, let's just select that properly. And then press P. Then we'll start moving down the arm. So this upper arm is going to follow this shoulder joint. So I'll press P. And you'll notice that if I want to select the bone, I can go like this, and that will only select the bone because there's a order of priority in which Maya will let you select things. So if I want to select the geometry, I can click on it, but if I want to select the bone, I can click and drag. And that can make selecting things that I want now really easy. So if I click on this part of the geometry here, and then just hold shift and drag, I can select the bone and press P. Same for this piece of geometry, shift and drag to get selection and press P. So both of these lower arm sections have gone on the lower part of there. I'm also going to have this parented to that same bone. And then for the hand, it's going to be which bits I want to follow what. So let's just press, what am I pressing? F. And then we'll select that piece of geometry and this joint. Just turn my move tool off again. P, this piece of geometry and this joint. P, this piece of geometry and this joint. P, this piece of geometry and this joint. P, this piece of geometry and this joint, and P. Okay, and at this stage, I'm just going to test a few things out. So let's just turn back on the controllers here. So we'll get that there, and we'll move the arm and make sure that things are following as I would expect it to. And that looks pretty good. And then we'll just select this hips controller and move him up and down. Yeah, and then all the torso and the arms going with it so far. So then we'll just turn that back off, and we can keep going. So next up, we're going to have this piece of geometry here. Now, as I said earlier, we don't really want this to move. The reason that it's a black material that you can't really see any detail on is that the audience, the player, will just assume that's moving. So we'll select that, and we're actually going to parent it to that joint there. Just turn my move tool off again. This upper leg part is going to be parented to the upper leg joint. The first lower leg part is going to go to the lower leg joint. And then the second lower leg part is going on the lower leg joint as well. And finally, the foot is going to go on the foot joint, P. And the final thing to do now is just get the head attached and the neck as well. Don't forget the neck like we did earlier with the material. So I'm going to select that bit there, and that's going to be parented to this joint here. Okay. Same for this. I'm going to parent it to that joint there. And for the head, select the head, shift select this joint in the head, press P. And then for the aerial, or the antenna, I'm going to select that and actually just parent that to the rest of the head. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is, I've just done one side. What I'll do now is just fast forward me doing the other side, so you can see what I'm doing, but it's going to be identical to what I did on this side. There's just no way of mirroring this. We have to do this the old school way. So here we go. Okay, I think I'm done then. And the reason I say I think I'm done is it's really easy to just miss something or to parent something that you didn't mean to the wrong thing, etc. So now we need to test. So we'll turn that skeleton off. We're going to turn back on these controllers here, and we just need to test him out. So we'll grab his hips, get our move controller, and we'll just try and move him around. That looks good. Everything's moving there as I would expect it to. Let's grab a leg and move that around. Okay, that's actually the foot control. I wanted this one. Yep, that looks okay. And everything's kind of doing IK where I expect it to. Just check the other leg. Looking good. Check an arm. Yep. Check the other arm. Yep. Check the head. So you can use the move control on the head. I actually prefer to use the rotate on the head. Yeah, that looks okay. And we'll just move his head side to side. Yep, good stuff. And then finally, let's just check the fingers. And you get this kind of cool finger controller on the end here, which is kind of nice. And we can rotate that, and that will kind of make a fist for us. And there's one on the thumb as well. Let's have a go at that. Doesn't really behave in the same way. There we go. But it looks like that is working as expected. We'll just check this knuckle joint there. Yeah. So what you should do now is continue to check everything. Make sure that everything behaves as expected. And if it doesn't, redo it. Now what we need to do is just a couple of loose end tying up things. So we'll go back to, where are we? Channel box layer editor. We have our geo layer, and what we want to do is make that reference. So now we just can't select it. We can still move it by moving the controls. Here we go, look. But we can't accidentally select it and break anything. So that's good really, isn't it? What we're also going to do is make sure that we save this as its very own file. Because this is now a rig that we're happy with. It works as expected. Rigs can be a little bit temperamental and can break. And so we're going to save this and then never work on this again unless we have to. This is just something we can go back to if the rig breaks down the line. So we're going to do File, Save Scene As, and I'm just going to call this Clean Rig. Like that. And then I know I've always got a clean rig. There we go. And that's it. We've completed another chapter, and you have now got a rigged character who is ready to be animated and then eventually put into Unreal Engine, and he's going to look so sick. So I hope you're excited about the next chapter. It's going to be a long one. It's going to include all the animation. So I look forward to seeing you all excited for animation in the next step. I'm able to continue making these videos thanks to the ongoing support of my amazing Patreon community. If you'd also like to support Game Dev Academy via Patreon, then check out the link in the description below. Thank you.